Good morning, crime community. I'm here to continue to read about Edgar Allan Poe. This is called Margaret Miller and Lucretia Maria Davidson. The name of Lucretia Davidson is familiar to all readers of poetry. Dining at the early age of 17, she had been rendered famous, not less, and certainly not more, but by her own precocious genius, then by three memorial biographies, one by President Morse of the American Society of Arts, another by Mrs. Sedgwick, and third by Robert Southey. Mr. Irving had formed an acquaintance with some of her relatives, and thus, while in Europe, took great interest in all that she said or written of his young countrywoman. Upon his return to America, she called upon Mrs. Davidson, and then in 1833 first saw the subject of the memoir, now before us, a fairy-like child of 11. 3 years afterward, he met with her again and then found her in delicate health. 3 years after having elapsed, the MMS, which formed the basis of the present volume, were placed in his hands of Mrs. Davidson as all that remained of her daughter. Few books have interested us more profoundly, yet the interest does not pertain solely to Margaret. In fact, the narrative, says Mr. Irving, will be found almost as illustrative of the character of the mother of the child that were singularly identified in taste, feeling, and pursuits, tenderly entwined together by maternal and filial affection. They reflected the inexpressibly touching grace and interest upon each other by his holy relationship, and to my mind, it would be marring one of the most beautiful and affecting groups in modern literature. To sunder them, in these words, the biographer conveys no more than a just idea of the exquisite loveliness of the picture here presented to view. The MSS handed Mr. Irving had been suffered in a great measure to tell their own thrilling tale. There had been no injustice attempt at their authorship. The compiler had confined himself to chronological arrangements of his memoranda and to such simple and natural comments as served to bind rather than to illustrate where no illustration was needed. These memoranda consist of relationships by Mrs. Davidson of the infantine peculiarities of her daughter and of her habits and general thoughts in more matured life, intermingled with letters from the young poetess to intimate friends. There is also a letter from bereaved mother of Mrs. Sedgwick, detailing the last moments of the child, a letter so full of all important nature, so full of minute beauty and truth and pathos, that a read it without tears would be to prove one selfless than human. The poetical remains of this young creature, who perished of consumption in her 16th year, occupy about 200 pages of a somewhat closely printed octavo. The youngest poem is called Lenore, and consists of some 2,000 lines, varying in meter from the ordinary octosyllabic to the four-footed or 12-syllabed iambic. The story, which is a romantic love tale not ill-conceived in its incidents, is told with a skill which might put more practiced bards to the blush, but the occasional bursts of the truest poetic fire. And although as indicative of her future power, it is most important as it is the longest of her productions, yet as a whole, it is not equal to some of her shorter compositions. It was written not long before her death at the age of 15, and as we glean from the biography, after patient reflection with much care and a high resolve to do something for fame, and the work of so mere a child is unquestionably wonderful. Its length viewed in connection with its keeping, its unity, its adaptation, and completeness will impress the metaphysician most forcibly, and surveying the capacities of its powers are here brought into play which are the last to be matured. For fancy we might have looked, and for the lower evidences of the skill in a perfect versification of the like, but hardly for what we see in Lenore. Yet remarkable is this production is from the pen of a girl of 15, and is by no means so incomprehensible as are some of the shorter pieces. We have known instances, rarely to be sure, but still we have known instances from finer poems in every respect than Lenore has been written by children as of immature age, but we still look upon us in vain for anything composed at 8 years which can be comparison with the lines subjoined. To Mama, farewell, dear mother, for a while. I must resign my plaintive smile. May angels watch the couch of woe, and joys unceasing round thee flow. May the Almighty Father spread his sheltering wings above thy head. But it is not long that we must part, then cheer thy downcast, drooping hearts. Remember, oh, remember me, unceasing is my love for thee. And death shall never sever earthly ties, when the love formed all senseless lies. Oh, that form with mine could flee and roam through wide eternity, could tread with thee the courts of heaven, and count the brilliant stars of even. Nor are these stanzas written at 10 in any degree less remarkable. My native lake, thy verdant banks, thy lucid stream, lit thy sun's resplendent beam, reflect each bending tree so light upon thy bounding bosom bright. But see these once again, my own, my beautiful Champlain, the little isles that deck the breast, and calmly on thy bosom rest. How often in my childish glee I've sported round them bright and free, but I but see thee once again, my own, my beautiful Champlain. How oft I've watched the freezing shower, the freshening shower, bend the summer trees and flower, and felt my little heart beat high as the bright rainbow graced the sky. But see thee once again, my own, my beautiful Champlain. I never see thee more, my native lake, my much loved shore, and must I bid a long adieu, my dear, my infant home to you. Shall I not see thee once again, my own, my beautiful Champlain? In the way of criticism upon these extraordinary compositions, Mr. Irving has attempted little, and in general, these seems more affectionate by the loveliness and purity of the child than even by the genius she has evinced. However highly she may have estimated this latter. In respect, however, to a poem entitled My Sister Lucretia, she thus speaks: we have said that the example of her sister Lucretia was incessantly before her, and no better proof can be given of it than in the following lines, which breathe the heavenly aspirations of her pure young spirit in strains of us quite unearthly. We may have read poetry more artificially perfect in its structure, but never in any more truly divine in its inspiration. The nature of inspiration is disputable, and we will not pretend to assert that Mr. Irving is in all the wrong. His words, however, in their hyperbole, do wrong to his subject, and would be hyperbole if applied to the most exultant poets of all time. The analogies of nature are universal, and just as the most rapidly growing herbage of the most speedy of its decay, just as the ephemera struggles to perfection in a day only to perish in the day's decline, so in mind of early matured only to the early in its decadence, and when we behold in the eye of the infancy, the soul of the adult is but indulging in a daydream to hope for another proportionate development. Should the prodigy survive a ripe age, a mental imbecility as far removed from idiocracy itself is too frequent the result. From the rule, these exceptions are rare indeed. But it should be observed that when the exception does occur, the intellect of a Titan cast, even to the days of its extreme senility, and acquires renown not in one, but in all the wide fields of fancy and of reason. Lucretia Maria Davidson, the elder of the two sweet sisters, who have acquired so much of fame prematurely, but not, like Margaret, an object of poetical emulation in her own family. In her genius, be it what it may, there is more of self-dependence, less of the initiative. The mother's generous romance of soul may have stimulated, but did not instruct. Thus, although she has actually given less evidence of power, in our opinion, than Margaret, less written proof, still its indication must be considered at higher value. Both perished at 16. Margaret, we think, has left the better poem, certainly the more precocious, while Lucretia evinces most equivocally the soul of the poet. And we quoted in full some stanzas composed by the former at 8 years of age. The latter's earliest effusions are dated at 14, yet the first compositions of the two seem to us as nearly equal merit. Most elaborate production of Margaret is Lenore. It was written not long before her death at the age of 15, after patient reflection with much care and with all that high resolve to do something for fame for which reputation of her sister had inspired her. Under such circumstances and with the early poetical education which could not have failed to receive, we confess that granting her a trifle more than average talent, it would have been rather a matter for surprise had she produced a worse than had produced a better poem than Lenore. Its length viewed in connection with its keeping, its unity, its adaptation, and its completeness, and all these are points having reference to artistical knowledge and perseverance, will impress the critic more favorably than its fancy or in any other indication of poetic power, and all of the important qualities we have seen far, very far, finer poems than Lenore written at a much earlier age than 15. Amir Khan, the longest and chief composition of Lucretia, has been long known for its reading public, partly through Professor Morris, yet no doubt partly through his own merits. The poets found their way to Southey, who, after his peculiar fashion and not unmindful of his previous ferraries, in the case of Kirk White, Chatterton, and other precocious ability, or at least celebrity, through power to review them in the quarterly. This was a period when we humbled ourselves with a subserviency which we have been disguised, had not been ludicrous, but the crudest critical dicta of Great Britain. It pleased the laureate and some squibbling in the way of demur to speak of the book in question as follows: in these poems there is enough of originality, enough of aspiration, enough of conscious energy, enough of growing power to warrant any expectations, however sanguine, which the patrons and the friends and parents of the deceased could have formed. Meaning nothing, or rather meaning anything, we have chose to interpret it. Thus, sentence is still sufficient, and in fact, half of it still would have been more than sufficient to establish upon the immovable basis the reputation of Miss Davidson in America. Henceforward, an examination of her true claims to distinction and considered little less than a declaration of hearsay. Nor does the awe of the laureate's ipse dixit seem to have yet entirely subsided. The genius of Lucretia Davidson, says Miss Sedgwick, has had to need a far more authoritative praise than ours. The following tribute is from the London Quarterly Review. What this lady, for whom and for whose opinion we still have the highest respect, can mean by calling the praise of Southby more authoritative than her own is to a point of view shall not pause to determine. Her praise is at least honest, as we hope so. Its authority is in exact proportion with which each one's estimate of her judgment, but it would not do to say all things of this author of Thalaba. It would not do to say it is in hearing of men who are sane and who are being sane, have perused the leading articles of the London Quarterly Review during the 10 or 15-year period that when Robert Southey had concocted the doctor, took definite leave of his wits. In fact, for anything that we have seen yet or heard to the contrary, the opinion of the laureate in respect to the poem Amir Khan is a matter still only known to Robert Southey, but were it known to all the world, as Miss Sedgwick supposes, was so charmingly innocent an error, we mean to say, were it really an honest opinion, this authoritative praise, still it would be worth, in the eyes of every sensible person, not just so much as it demonstrates or makes a showing of demonstrating. Happily, all the day will gone by, and we trust forever, when men are content to swear blindly by the words of a master poet laureate, thought he be. But whatever Southey says of the poem is at best an opinion and no more. What Miss Sedgwick says is of it very much in the same predicament. Amr Khan, she writes, has long been before the public, and we think it has suffered from a very general and natural distrust of precocious genius. The versification of graceful, the starry beautiful developed, and the Orientalism is well sustained, and we think it would not have been done discredit to our most popular poets in the meridian of their fame, as the production of the girl of 15, it seems prodigious. This cant of a kind heart, then betraying into error of natural sound judgment in perhaps the only species of cant in the world, not altogether contemptible. We yield to no one in warmth of affirmation for the personal character of these sweet sisters, as their character is depicted by the mother, by Miss Sedgwick and Mr. Irving. But it's cost us no effort to distinguish that which in our heart is love of our work from that which is our intellect, is appreciation in their poetic ability. For the former, as critic, we have nothing to do. The distinction is one too obvious for comment, and its observation would have spared us but twaddle on the part of the commentators upon Amr Khan. We will endeavor to convey as concisely as possible some ideas of this poem as it exists, but not in the fancy of the enthusiastic, but in fact. It includes 440 lines. The meter is chiefly octosyllabic, and at one point it is varied by a casual introduction of an anapaest in the first and second foot, at another in a song of 7 stanzas of 4 lines each, rhyming alternately, the meter anapaesaic of 4 feet, alternating with 3. The versification is always good so far as the meager written rules of our English prosody extend. That is to say, there is seldom a syllable too much or too little, too long or too short. Syllables are placed at random in a crowd of consonants, sometimes renders a line unpronounceable. For example, he loved, and oh, he loved so well that sorrow scarce dared break the spell. At times again, the rhythm lapses, and in the most inartistical manner, and evidently without design from one species to another, altogether incongruous, as for example, in the 6th line of these 8, where the tipsing anapaesaic staples into the demuric iambic, recovering itself even more awkwardly in the conclusion. Bright star of the morning, this bosom is bold. I was forced from my native shade, and I wrapped me around with my mantle's fold, a sad mournful Circassian maid, and I have vowed the rapture should never more, the chainless cheeks, the rayless eye, and then I vowed to feel neither bliss nor love, but I vowed I would meet thee and die. Occasionally, the versification rises into melody and even strength as here. 'T was in an hour when Paris loved to gaze upon the heavenly above. These portals bright with many a gem are closed forever, closed on them. Upon the whole, however, it is a feeble, vacillating, and ineffective, giving token of having been touched up by the hand of a friend from a much worse into a present condition. Such rhymes as floor and shower and seized and breast and shade and spread, brow, woe, clear and far, clear and air and morning and dawning, forth and earth, step and deep, con and hand are constantly occurring. Altogether, certainly, we could not, as a general rule, expect better things from a girl of 16. We still look in vain and with something very much akin to a smile for aught even approaching that marvelous ease and grace of versification, about which Miss Sedgwick in the benevolence of her heart discourses, nor does the story to our dispassionate apprehension appear beautifully developed. It runs thus: Amr Khan, son of Bahar of Kashmir, weds a Circassian slave who, cold as a statue, and is obstinately silent, refers to love, to return his love. The saboteur applies to a magician who gives him a pensive flower, gathered at midnight's magic hour, the effect of whose perfume renders him apparently lifeless while still in possession of all his senses. Amrita, the slave, supposing her lover dead, gives away the clamorous grief, and reveals the secret love which has long been born her lord, but refused the divulge, become a slave. Amir Khan whereupon revives, and all trouble is at end. Of course, no one at all read an Eastern fable will be willing to give Miss Davidson credit for originality in the conception of this little story, and if she have claim to merit at all as regards it, the claim must be founded upon the manner of narration, and it will be at once evident in the most naked outline along can be given to the compass of 440 lines. The tale is, in somber fact, told very much as a young person might be expected to tell it. The strength of the narrator is wholly laid out upon the description of moonlight in the usual style which the poem commences upon a description. A second description of moonlight is precisely the same manner with which the second division commences. And then the third description of the hall in which the entranced Sudhar reposes, this is all, absolutely all, or at least the rest of his nakedness of mere catalog. We recognize throughout the poetic sentiment, but very, very little of poetic power. We see occasional gleams of imagination, for example, the every crystal cloud of heaven bowed as it passed the queen of even. Amrita was cold as the marble floor that glistens beneath the nightly shower. As the calm hour when Paris love to gaze upon the heaven above, when portals bright with the many a gem are closed, forever closed on them. The Subdahar with noiseless step rushed like the night breeze o'er the deep. We look in vain for another instance worth quoting, and there were fancies seen in these examples, observable either in the general conduct or in the incidents of the narrative. So we should not feel obliged to disagree or unequivocally with that opinion which pronounces this clever little production, in which would not have done discredit to our most popular poets in the meridian of their fame. As the work of the girl of 16, most assuredly we do not think it prodigious. In regard to it, we may repeat that we said of Lenore that we have seen finer poems in every respect written by children of more immature age. It is credible composition, nothing beyond this, and in so saying, we shall startle none with the brainless and the adapters of ready-made ideas, but we are convinced that we express the unuttered sentiment of every educated individual who has read the poem, nor having given the plain fact of the case, do we feel called upon to proffer any apology for our flat refusal to play ditto either to Miss Sedgwick or to Mr. Irving or to Mr. Southby. That is the end of Margaret Miller and Lucretia Maria Davidson, which we will leave for another day, another story of Poe. So if you think his criticisms are worth reading and worth liking and enjoying, please like and subscribe and share, and have a nice day.